A billionaire finds a young woman collapsed outside his frozen mountain gate, barefoot, trembling, whispering, "It hurts. Down there too." At first he thinks she's talking about her injuries, but when he brings her inside and sees what she's been through, he realizes those words mean something far deeper, something that shakes the walls around his own heart. He's a man who's built empires out of steel and silence. She's a woman who's lost everything, except her faith. But when the world discovers them together, mercy turns into scandal, and compassion turns into chaos. Now hunted by headlines, haunted by guilt, and facing the truth about the pain he's buried for years, he'll have to make an impossible choice: protect his fortune, or the broken soul who reminded him what love feels like. When healing costs everything, what's worth saving? The empire he built, or the woman who saved his heart? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The November fog clung thick and heavy to the Rocky Mountains, wrapping Gavin Rourke's sprawling estate in a suffocating grey blanket. Inside his master bathroom, where imported marble stretched from floor to ceiling, the billionaire tech mogul gripped the edges of his custom vanity, head bowed. The headlines from the morning papers still burned in his mind. Tech titan throws thousands into unemployment. Rourke's heartless holiday layoffs. Billionaire chooses profits over people. His knuckles whitened against the marble. The bathroom's recessed lighting cast harsh shadows across his face, a face he couldn't bring himself to look at in the mirror. At 39, he looked older than his years, worry lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth. His usually well-maintained appearance had grown ragged, his dark hair disheveled, his expensive dress shirt wrinkled. The sound of his phone buzzing against the counter made him flinch. Another message from Clarissa's lawyers. His soon-to-be ex-wife wasn't content with just leaving him for Marcus Chen, his longtime rival in the tech industry. No, she wanted to drag his name through the mud in the divorce proceedings too. "You've become a monster," she'd said the day she left, her designer heels clicking across their marble foyer for the last time. "All you care about is your precious company, your numbers, your legacy." The worst part was, he couldn't entirely disagree with her. Gavin finally forced himself to look up, meeting his own hollow gaze in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of too many sleepless nights spent agonizing over quarterly reports and profit margins. The decision to lay off 3,000 employees right before the holidays hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary to keep the company afloat. At least that's what he kept telling himself. The vast emptiness of his mountain estate pressed in around him. The 20,000-square-foot home had never felt so large, so cold. Even the heated floors couldn't ward off the chill that had settled in his bones. Everything about this place, from the smart home technology he'd designed himself to the curated art collection worth millions, felt like a mockery now. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, his little sister. The memory of her still had the power to knock the wind from his lungs, even 8 years after losing her to cancer. She would have known what to say, how to help him find his way back to the person he used to be. Sarah had always been his moral compass, the one person who could call him out on his mistakes without making him feel judged. What happened to that boy who used to give away his lunch money to kids who couldn't afford to eat? She'd asked him once, not long before she died. The one who believed in something bigger than himself? That boy felt like a stranger now. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Gavin made his way down to his home office. The wall of windows overlooking the private lake offered a panoramic view of the approaching storm. Grey clouds roiled overhead, promising the season's first snow. He pressed a button on his desk, activating the house's intercom system. "Everyone can head home for the season," he announced to his staff. "Full pay, of course. I'll call when I need you to return." A chorus of uncertain thank yous echoed back. Within the hour, the last car disappeared down the winding mountain road, leaving him entirely alone. Just as he wanted, just as he deserved. The storm grew closer as evening settled in. Gavin poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch, the amber liquid catching the light from the fireplace. He settled into his favorite leather chair, watching the first fat snowflakes begin to fall outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Let it all burn," he muttered into his glass, taking a long sip. The scotch burned going down, but it was nothing compared to the bitterness that had taken root in his heart. His company's stock might be up, but he'd lost everything that actually mattered: his marriage, his reputation, his faith in humanity, and most importantly, his faith in himself. The wind picked up, driving the snow sideways against the windows. The trees at the edge of his property swayed dangerously, their branches scraping against each other like skeleton fingers. Gavin was about to pour himself another drink when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it over the howling wind. Knock, knock, knock. He froze, glass halfway to his lips. It had to be his imagination. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and he'd dismissed all his staff. The security gate was closed and locked, the alarm system armed. Then came another sound that made his blood run cold. A dull thud, followed by silence. Gavin set his glass down slowly, his heart beginning to race. He pulled up the security camera feed on his phone, scanning through the different views of his property. The snow was falling so heavily now that visibility was poor, but there, by the main gate, he caught movement. A dark shape lay crumpled in the accumulating snow. He zoomed in, squinting at the grainy image. It looked like a person. "Damn it," he muttered, already reaching for his coat. Every instinct told him to stay inside where it was safe, to call the police, and let them handle whatever was happening at his gate. But something, maybe the last remnants of the person he used to be, or perhaps Sarah's voice in his head, wouldn't let him ignore someone who might need help. The bitter cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside. The wind cut through his wool coat as if it were made of paper, and the snow stung his face like tiny needles. He trudged through the rapidly accumulating powder, his expensive Italian leather shoes completely inappropriate for the weather. As he approached the gate, the shape on the ground became clearer. It was indeed a person, lying face down in the snow. Gavin's heart thundered in his chest as he punched in the security code with trembling fingers. The gate swung open with a mechanical whir that was nearly lost in the howling wind. He approached cautiously, aware that this could be some kind of trap. But when he got closer, he saw no signs of weapons or ill intent, just a small figure, unmoving in the deepening snow. With gentle hands, he rolled the person over. It was a woman, her face pale as the snow around her. Dark hair spilled out from beneath a worn knit cap, and her clothes, clearly inadequate for the weather, were soaked through. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that sent a spike of fear through him. Gavin pressed his fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, but weak and thready. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and her skin was ice-cold to the touch. As he carried her back toward the house, her head lolled against his chest, and he caught the scent of something familiar. Hospital antiseptic. Questions raced through his mind. Who was she? Where had she come from? The nearest hospital was over 30 miles away. Had she walked all that way in this weather? And more importantly, why? But those questions would have to wait. Right now, he needed to get her warm before hypothermia claimed another life on his conscience. As he kicked the front door shut behind them, the storm raged on, sealing them both inside his mountain fortress with secrets yet to be revealed. The warmth of the house enveloped them as Gavin carried the unconscious woman through his grand foyer, his wet shoes leaving tracks on the imported marble floors. For once, he didn't care about the mess. His focus was entirely on the frighteningly still form in his arms, her breathing so shallow he had to keep checking to make sure she was still alive. He headed straight for the great room, where the fireplace still burned hot and bright. Laying her gently on the plush sofa, he quickly grabbed the cashmere throw from the back of his leather chair and wrapped it around her. Her clothes were soaked through. She needed to get dry, and fast. But the thought of undressing an unconscious stranger made him uncomfortable. Instead, he cranked up the thermostat and added another log to the fire, hoping the heat would help dry her naturally. In the firelight, he got his first good look at her face. She was young, probably in her late 20s or early 30s, with delicate features that reminded him painfully of Sarah. Dark circles under her eyes suggested exhaustion, and her cheeks were hollow, as if she hadn't been eating well. A hospital ID bracelet was still attached to her wrist, the text too water-damaged to read. "What happened to you?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. The woman remained unconscious, but some color was starting to return to her face as the room's warmth began to take effect. Gavin ran his hands through his hair, suddenly aware of how surreal this situation was. Here he was, a man who had spent the entire day wallowing in self-pity, now responsible for a mysterious woman who had literally collapsed at his gate. If this wasn't the universe's way of forcing him to look beyond himself, he didn't know what was. He needed to call for help, but one look out the window told him that wouldn't be possible anytime soon. The storm had intensified, the snow now falling so thick it obscured everything beyond the immediate vicinity of the house. Even if emergency services could make it up the mountain in these conditions, it would take hours. A soft moan from the sofa drew his attention back to his unexpected guest. Her eyelids fluttered, and Gavin found himself holding his breath. Slowly, her eyes opened, revealing irises the color of warm honey. For a moment, she stared at the coffered ceiling in confusion. Then her gaze found him, and fear flashed across her face. She tried to sit up too quickly, causing the room to spin. Gavin reached out to steady her, but she flinched away from his touch. "It's okay," he said, keeping his voice soft and even. "You're safe. I found you outside my gate. Do you remember what happened?" The woman clutched the cashmere throw tighter around herself, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape routes. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, rough as if from disuse. I was walking. The storm, I didn't expect it to hit so fast." She swallowed hard, still not meeting his eyes. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here." "You're right, you shouldn't be walking alone in a snowstorm," Gavin replied, unable to keep a hint of sternness from his voice. "You could have died out there." A strange expression crossed her face at his words, something between resignation and disappointment. It made his chest tighten uncomfortably. Before he could question her further, she started coughing, deep, racking coughs that shook her entire frame. Gavin hurried to the kitchen and returned with a glass of water, which she accepted with trembling hands. As she drank, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A medical port, partially visible beneath her collar, the kind used for chemotherapy treatments, the kind Sarah had worn. The whistling wind drew Gavin to the window. Something wasn't right. Through the swirling snow, a dark shape lay crumpled near his front gate. His heart jumped into his throat. "Dear God," he muttered, already reaching for his heavy coat. The whiskey glass clattered forgotten on the side table. The brutal cold hit him like a physical blow as he yanked open the heavy front door. Wind whipped snow into his face, nearly blinding him. The beam of his flashlight bounced wildly as he fought his way down the path. His Italian leather shoes, never meant for weather like this, slipped on the accumulating snow. As he drew closer to the gate, the shape resolved itself into a human form. A woman lay curled on her side, no coat, no shoes, nothing but thin hospital scrubs. Her dark skin had taken on an alarming greyish tinge, her lips tinged blue from the cold. "Mum, can you hear me?" Gavin knelt beside her, touching her shoulder gently. She was trembling violently, arms wrapped around her middle as if in pain. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused. "It hurts," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Down there, too." Her words were barely audible over the howling wind. Without hesitation, Gavin slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her shoulders. She weighed almost nothing, like lifting a child. Her head lolled against his chest as he carried her back towards the house, his feet now finding purchase with desperate urgency. Inside, he headed straight for the great room fireplace, where flames still danced behind the glass doors. He laid her gently on the thick rug before the hearth, grabbed the throw blankets from the nearby couch, and wrapped them around her shivering form. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the one he needed. Dr. Hensley might be retired, but he still lived just down the mountain. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "This better be good, Rourke. It's nearly midnight. I need you here, now. Woman collapsed outside my gate. She's hypothermic, in pain. Something about hurting down there. I don't know what to do." There was a pause, then the sound of movement. "What's she wearing?" "Hospital scrubs. No shoes, no coat. She's barely conscious." "Christ." The doctor's voice sharpened. "Keep her warm, but don't put her too close to direct heat. Don't give her anything hot to drink. I'm on my way." The next 30 minutes were among the longest of Gavin's life. He sat beside the stranger, watching her shallow breathing, afraid to move her, but terrified she might slip away if he didn't do something. Her trembling had lessened somewhat, but her face was twisted in pain. Finally, heavy boots sounded on his porch. Gavin yanked open the door to reveal Dr. Hensley, snow-coating his thick grey hair, medical bag in hand. The older man brushed past him without ceremony, heading straight for his patient. "Well, I'll be damned," Dr. Hensley muttered, kneeling beside the woman. "It's Janelle Brooks." Gavin blinked in surprise. "You know her?" "Treated her at the clinic last month." The doctor's practiced hands checked her pulse, her temperature, her pupils. "She's been through hell. Cancer diagnosis 6 months ago. No insurance, no family to speak of. The women's shelter's been helping her, but they closed last week due to funding cuts." Something cold and heavy settled in Gavin's stomach. He watched as Dr. Hensley gently examined his patient, speaking to her in low, soothing tones when she stirred. "She's not injured," the doctor finally announced, straightening with a grunt. "Exhausted, dehydrated, and still recovering from surgery. The pain she mentioned, it's not just physical. She had a hysterectomy 3 weeks ago. Aggressive uterine cancer. They got it all, but—" He shook his head. The shelter closing couldn't have come at a worse time. Gavin stared down at Janelle's face, seeing it differently now. The hollow cheeks, the dark circles under her eyes. They weren't just from tonight's ordeal. They were the marks of a longer battle, one fought alone. "She needs rest, fluids, and warmth," Dr. Hensley continued. "I'll leave some pain medication. Keep her comfortable until this storm passes." He paused, fixing Gavin with a shrewd look. "Unless you'd rather I try to transport her somewhere else." The suggestion made something in Gavin's chest constrict painfully. He thought of his sister Sarah, how she'd looked near the end. The same haunted exhaustion, the same vulnerability. For years he'd locked away that pain, buried it under work and wealth, and careful distance from anything that might make him feel too deeply. But looking at Janelle now, something cracked open inside him. A wall he'd built so carefully began to crumble. "She stays," he said quietly, surprised by the roughness in his voice. "I'll take care of her." Dr. Hensley nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. He began pulling supplies from his bag, IV supplies, medication, basic monitoring equipment. "I'll get her started on fluids. You got a guest room ready?" Gavin nodded, already mentally preparing the closest bedroom. He'd sent his staff away, but the rooms were always maintained. "I'll get it set up." As he turned to go, Dr. Hensley's voice stopped him. "Gavin." He looked back. The doctor was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who never ask for it. Remember that. The words followed Gavin as he climbed the stairs, echoing in time with his footsteps. In the guest room, as he turned down the bed and adjusted the thermostat, he found himself thinking of Sarah again. How she'd fought so hard, never complaining, never wanting to be a burden. How he'd thrown money at her care, but kept his heart carefully guarded, afraid to feel the full weight of what was happening. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Whatever Janelle Brooks needed, he would provide it, not just with his wealth, but with his presence. Something told him that this night wasn't just about saving her. Maybe in some way he didn't yet understand, it was about saving himself too. Sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, casting a warm glow across Janelle's face. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her features as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The bed beneath her was impossibly soft, wrapped in what felt like a cloud of blankets. For a moment she wondered if she was dreaming. The events of the previous night came back in fragments, the biting cold, the desperate walk through the snow, the pain that had finally brought her to her knees. And then, warmth. A man's strong arms, a doctor's gentle hands. She pushed herself up slowly, wincing at the tenderness in her abdomen. The room was larger than any bedroom she'd ever seen, decorated in muted blues and greys. A fire crackled softly in a stone fireplace across from the bed. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her voice raspier than she expected. The door opened, and Gavin Rourke stepped in, carrying a tray. He moved with the careful precision of someone unused to such tasks, his expression a mixture of concern and awkwardness. "Good morning," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I brought breakfast. Dr. Hensley said you should try to eat something." Janelle's eyes widened at the spread before her, a steaming bowl of oatmeal topped with fresh berries, toast with honey, and a cup of what smelled like chamomile tea. "This is very kind of you," she said, pulling the blankets closer around her shoulders. "But I've already imposed too much. I should go." "You should eat," Gavin interrupted firmly, though his voice remained gentle. "The storm's still bad outside, and Dr. Hensley was clear about you needing rest." She wanted to protest further, but the aroma of the food made her stomach growl embarrassingly loud. A faint smile flickered across Gavin's face. "I'll leave you to it," he said, turning to go. "There's a bathroom through that door, and I had some clothes brought up. They might be a bit big, but they're clean and warm. Mr. Rourke," she called as he reached the door. He paused, looking back. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once, then disappeared into the hallway. Later that afternoon, against all advice, Janelle attempted to get up. She managed to shower and change into the oversized sweater and pants that had been left for her, but by the time she reached the bedroom door, her legs were trembling. She made it halfway down the hallway before the dizziness hit. The world tilted sideways, and she reached for the wall to steady herself. Suddenly, strong hands caught her elbows, supporting her weight. What part of rest wasn't clear? Gavin's voice was stern, but tinged with worry. "I'm fine," she protested weakly, even as she sagged against him. "I just needed to stretch my legs." "You need to heal," he corrected, helping her back to her room. "Doctor's orders. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Gavin would bring her meals, lingering a little longer each time. At first, their conversations were brief and practical, but gradually, Janelle began sharing pieces of her story. "I thought I had everything figured out," she said one evening, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "Good job at the nursing home, married to my college sweetheart, trying to start a family." She traced the pattern on her teacup with a finger. "Then I lost the baby, 6 months along. My husband, he couldn't handle it, left before the divorce papers were even filed." Gavin sat in the armchair across from her bed, his face unreadable in the firelight. "And then the diagnosis," he said quietly. She nodded. "The irony, right? The cancer that took away any chance of having children probably started around the time I lost the baby." Her voice caught slightly. "The shelter helped me through the worst of it. Those women became my family when I had no one else. But now the shelter's closed." Gavin finished, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Budget cuts," she confirmed. "I was trying to make it to my cousin's place in Denver when the storm hit." She looked up at him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry for landing on your doorstep like this." "Don't be," he said firmly. "You needed help. That's what people are supposed to do. Help each other." Something in his voice made her study him more closely. There was pain there, buried deep beneath his controlled exterior. She'd seen that kind of haunted look before, in the eyes of patients who'd lost someone they loved. "What about you?" she asked softly. "Do you live here alone?" "Yes." His answer was clipped, defensive. Then, after a moment, "My staff usually stays through the winter, but I sent them away this year. Needed some time alone." "That sounds lonely." He stood abruptly, moving to add another log to the fire. "I prefer it that way." But something in the way he lingered each evening, the way he seemed to relax slightly in her presence, told a different story. There was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his gruff exterior, showing itself in small ways. The careful way he arranged her pillows, how he always made sure her tea was the perfect temperature, the books he brought her from his library. Each night as he added another log to the fire, Janelle noticed him staying a little longer. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. The massive house no longer felt quite so cold, quite so empty. One evening, as he stoked the fire, she caught him looking at a photo on the mantel, a young woman with his eyes, smiling broadly at the camera. "Your sister?" she asked gently. He stiffened, but didn't deny it. "Sarah," he said after a long pause. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer." Understanding bloomed in Janelle's chest. "Is that why you helped me?" Gavin turned to face her, his expression raw and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Maybe, partly. But you needed help, and I was here." The simplicity of his answer touched something deep inside her. They were both broken in their own ways, both carrying losses that had shaped them. But somehow, in this unexpected sanctuary, they'd found a kind of peace in each other's company. That night, as always, he added another log to the fire before leaving. But this time, his good night carried a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. 3 days passed like gentle waves on a shore. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the kitchen floor as Janelle stood at the counter, her strength returning day by day. She couldn't stay idle any longer. It wasn't in her nature. "You really don't have to do this," Gavin protested, watching her tie an apron around her waist. "I want to," she insisted, her voice warm but firm. "Besides, this kitchen needs some life in it." She began humming as she worked. the melody of amazing grace floating through the air as she wiped down countertops and organized cabinets. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, filling the empty spaces with something that felt like memory. "When's the last time someone actually cooked in here?" she asked, examining a pristine set of barely used pots. Gavin leaned against the doorframe, his expression distant. "The staff makes meals when they're here, but actual cooking? Not since Sarah." Janelle nodded, understanding in her eyes. She opened the pantry, taking stock of the basics. "Well, today that changes. Do you have cornmeal?" To both their surprise, he did. Soon the kitchen filled with the warm, homey smell of cornbread baking. Janelle moved about the space with growing confidence, humming, "How Great Thou Art," under her breath as she worked. The sound of her voice brought something alive in the house, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. Gavin found himself drawn to the kitchen more and more, watching her work. She had a way about her, a grace that made even simple tasks seem like small celebrations. When she laughed at finding his spice rack virtually untouched, the sound bounced off the walls like sunshine. "No wonder everything tastes so bland," she exclaimed, examining the dusty containers. "When did you last use these?" "I prefer simple foods," he defended, but there was a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Simple doesn't have to mean flavorless," she countered, pulling out the cornbread. The golden crust gleamed invitingly. They shared lunch at the kitchen island, something Gavin couldn't remember ever doing before. Usually he ate in his office or the formal dining room when he remembered to eat at all. But here he was, watching Janelle slather honey butter on a piece of warm cornbread. "Try it," she encouraged, sliding the plate toward him. The first bite transported him. Memories of Sarah's attempts at baking flooded back. Not always successful, but always made with love. "This is incredible," he admitted. "Amazing what a little seasoning can do," she teased, her eyes twinkling. "I haven't cooked for anyone since Sarah," he found himself saying. The words surprised him. He rarely spoke of his sister. She loved being in the kitchen. Not that she was very good at it, but she tried. Always experimenting with recipes. Janelle's smile was gentle. Sometimes the trying is more important than the result. The afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, snow began to fall in lazy spirals. The sound of a truck pulling up broke their comfortable silence. "That'll be Doug with the firewood," Gavin said, rising from his seat. Doug Peterson was a local handyman who'd been delivering firewood to the estate for years. As they loaded the wood into the garage, Doug's eyes kept darting towards the house, where the smell of freshly baked cornbread still lingered. "Heard some talk in town," Doug ventured, stacking another log. "About you having company up here?" Gavin's jaw tightened slightly. "She's recovering from surgery. Needed a place to stay." Sure. Doug nodded, but there was a knowing look in his eyes that made Gavin uncomfortable. "Just surprised is all. You being alone up here so long." By evening, Gavin could imagine the gossip spreading through town like wildfire. The reclusive billionaire, the mysterious woman. People would talk. They always did. But as he walked through the house later that night, he found himself caring less about the rumors than he expected. The living room was quiet except for the crackling of the fire. Janelle sat curled in one of the oversized armchairs, a book open in her lap. The firelight played across her face, catching the quiet contentment in her expression. She was reading one of Sarah's old novels. He recognized the worn spine. Something stirred in his chest. Unfamiliar, yet not unwelcome. It felt like the first warm day after a long winter, like something frozen beginning to thaw. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a mausoleum of memories. The sound of Janelle's humming still echoed in the hallways. The smell of cornbread lingered in the kitchen, and here in the living room, the firelight seemed warmer somehow. He stood there for a moment, watching her read, feeling that strange new sensation grow stronger. It took him a while to recognize it for what it was. Hope, tentative and fragile as a spring seedling, but undeniably there. Janelle looked up from her book, catching his gaze. "Would you like to join me?" she asked, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. He did. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a deceptive calm before the storm that was about to break. Gavin stood at his usual spot by the window, coffee warming his hands, watching Janelle take her daily walk around the property. The doctors had encouraged gentle exercise as part of her recovery, and she'd made it part of her routine. She moved slower than usual today, the cold making her joints stiff. Without thinking, Gavin set down his coffee and grabbed her coat from the hook by the door. She'd forgotten it again, stubborn as always about the cold. He stepped outside, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. "You'll catch your death out here," he called out, holding up the coat. Janelle turned, her smile bright against the winter landscape. "Yes, Dad," she teased, but gratefully slipped her arms into the sleeves as he held the coat for her. Neither of them noticed the subtle click of a camera lens from the tree line. By noon the next day, Gavin's phone wouldn't stop ringing. The first call came from his PR team, never a good sign this early in the day. Then his lawyer, then his board members. Finally, he looked at the news alerts flooding his screen and felt his stomach drop. The photo was everywhere. Him helping Janelle with her coat, her smile caught in perfect profile, his hands lingering perhaps a moment too long on her shoulders. The headlines were brutal. "Heartless billionaire hides in the mountains with mystery woman. Rourke's secret mountain romance. Tech titan's cabin fever. Who is she?" The stories beneath were worse, full of speculation and insinuation. They dug up everything. The shelter where Janelle had stayed, her medical history, even her former marriage. They'd twisted something pure into something tawdry, turning their quiet healing into tabloid fodder. Gavin's hands shook as he scrolled through the articles. The photographer must have trespassed on his property, hiding in the woods like a vulture. The invasion of privacy made his blood boil, but it was the violation of Janelle's dignity that truly enraged him. He found her in the kitchen, staring at her phone with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, looking up at him. "I never meant to cause trouble." "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "This is my fault. I should have had better security." But she was already moving, gathering her few belongings. "I should go. I'm well enough now, and this isn't fair to you." "Janelle, stop." He caught her arm gently as she passed. "You don't have to leave. Look at what they're saying about you." She thrust her phone at him, showing more headlines, more cruel speculation. "They're calling me your mountain mistress. They're saying I'm taking advantage of you, that I'm just after your money. Some are even suggesting I faked being sick to—" "I don't care what they say," Gavin interrupted. "None of it is true, and we both know that. But your reputation has survived worse." He took her shoulders, much like in that damned photograph, but this time to steady her. "I promise I can protect you from this. Just, please stay." The moment hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Gavin's phone rang again, and this time the caller ID made his blood run cold. Harrison and Associates, Clarissa's lawyers. "Mr. Rourke," the smooth voice began as soon as he answered. "I'm calling regarding some concerning developments. Mrs. Rourke, ex-Mrs. Rourke," Gavin corrected sharply, "is deeply worried about your recent behavior. The isolation, the erratic decisions, now this situation with an unknown woman. She believes these actions demonstrate a pattern of mental instability that makes you unfit to lead your company. Gavin's grip on the phone tightened. What exactly are you suggesting? Mrs. Rourke plans to petition the court for an emergency evaluation of your competency. Given your history with depression after your sister's passing and these new concerning behaviors, she believes half the company's shares should be placed in protected status under her management until you've received proper treatment. The threat was clear. Clarissa was using this situation to make a grab for his company. She'd always resented that he'd protected his assets before their marriage, keeping the company solely in his name. Now she'd found a way to try to take what she couldn't get in the divorce. Tell Clarissa she can go to hell, Gavin said coldly, and hung up. But his hands were shaking again as he set down the phone. Everything he'd built, everything he'd protected was suddenly at risk. And for what? Because he'd shown kindness to someone in need? Because he'd finally started to feel human again? Janelle stood watching him, her bag half packed on the kitchen counter. That was about me, wasn't it? No, he said firmly. It was about Clarissa being Clarissa, using any weapon she can find. Then I'm definitely leaving. I won't be used as a weapon against you. She reached for her bag, but Gavin was faster, placing his hand over hers. If you leave, they win, he said quietly. Clarissa, the tabloids, all of them. They get to decide what's real and what isn't. They get to turn something good into something ugly. Is that what you want? Janelle's hand trembled under his. What I want doesn't matter. Your whole life is at stake. Your company, your reputation. Maybe it's time I fought for something that actually matters. The words came out before he could stop them, but he realized as he said them that they were true. My reputation? It's built on quarterly profits and stock prices. My company? It's just numbers in a computer. But this? He gestured to the space between them, to the home they'd somehow built in these few weeks. This is real. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and heavy, blanketing the world in white. Would trap them here, at least for a while. But Gavin found he didn't mind. Let the storm come. Let Clarissa plot. Let the tabloids speculate. For the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for. Janelle looked up at him, her eyes still uncertain, but no longer filled with tears. You really want me to stay? I really do. He managed a small smile. Besides, who else is going to teach me how to properly season my food? That earned him a laugh, watery but real. She wiped her eyes and slowly began unpacking her bag, one item at a time. Each piece she put back felt like a small victory, a quiet defiance against the chaos trying to tear apart their peace. Gavin watched her, already planning his next moves. He'd need to call his lawyers, strengthen security around the property, prepare statements for the press. The battle for his company, and his right to live his life as he chose, was just beginning. But as he watched Janelle return her worn novel to its place by the fireplace, he knew with absolute certainty that it was a battle worth fighting. The snow continued to fall outside, building drifts that would soon make the mountain roads impassable. But inside, by the warmth of the fire they'd kept burning all these weeks, something else was building too. Something stronger than scandal, more powerful than corporate threats. Something real. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Gavin's black Range Rover wound its way down the mountain road toward Aspen Ridge. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, jaw clenched against the thought of facing people's judgment. But beside him, Janelle sat calm and composed, watching the snow-laden pines pass by their window. You don't have to do this, he said for the third time since breakfast. Yes, I do. Her voice was gentle but firm. Hiding only makes people imagine the worst. Besides, she added with a small smile, We need groceries unless you plan on eating plain oatmeal for another week." The town of Aspen Ridge came into view, a picturesque mountain community with Victorian-style buildings lining Main Street, their roofs topped with fresh snow. As they pulled into a parking spot outside Wilson's general store, heads turned. Two women outside the coffee shop stopped mid-conversation to stare. Janelle straightened her second-hand coat, the one she'd arrived in, now cleaned and mended. "Ready?" Gavin nodded, though his throat felt tight. He hadn't been into town in months, preferring to have supplies delivered. Now he felt exposed, vulnerable in a way his wealth usually protected him from. The bell above Wilson's door chimed as they entered. Mrs. Wilson herself stood behind the counter, her eyes widening at the sight of them. But before she could react, Janelle stepped forward with a warm smile. "Good morning. Those are beautiful poinsettias in your window. Did you grow them yourself?" Mrs. Wilson blinked, clearly thrown off guard by the genuine friendliness. "Why, yes, I did. In my greenhouse out back. They're gorgeous. My grandmother used to grow them too." Janelle moved through the store with natural grace, selecting fresh vegetables and staples, drawing Mrs. Wilson into a conversation about winter gardening. Gavin followed, pushing the cart, aware of the whispers and stares, but amazed at how Janelle seemed to deflect them with simple kindness. She knew everyone's names somehow, greeted the stockboy Tommy, asked about Mr. Peterson's hip replacement, complimented Sarah's new haircut. These were people she'd met during her brief time in town before illness had forced her into the shelter. When they reached the checkout, their cart full of fresh ingredients, Janelle pulled out a worn wallet. Gavin started to reach for his, but she shook her head. "I can pay for my own groceries," she said quietly. "I may not have much, but I have enough for this." He understood then. This wasn't just about groceries. It was about dignity. Outside, snow had started falling again in lazy flakes. Janelle pointed to the small white church across the street, its steeple reaching toward grey clouds. "Would you mind if we stop there? I promised Reverend Ellis I'd help with the food bank when I was stronger." The church interior was warm and smelled of coffee and old hymnals. They found Reverend Ellis in the basement, surrounded by cardboard boxes and canned goods. The pastor's weathered face creased into a smile when he saw them. "Janelle, and Mr. Rourke, this is a surprise." "Please, just Gavin," he said, suddenly remembering the last time he'd seen Ellis, at a charity gala 3 years ago, when he'd written a large check but barely spoken to anyone. "We've come to help," Janelle announced, already rolling up her sleeves. "These food boxes won't organize themselves." For the next 2 hours, they sorted donations, packed boxes, and labeled them for delivery. Gavin found himself working alongside people he'd never really seen before: the retired schoolteacher, the young mother with 3 kids, the mechanic who'd lost his job at the mine. They didn't treat him like a billionaire or a scandal. They just handed him cans to sort and boxes to stack. At one point, while Janelle was showing a volunteer how to efficiently pack the boxes, Reverend Ellis appeared at Gavin's side. "I remember when you funded our roof repair," the pastor said quietly. "That check meant a lot. But this?" He gestured to Gavin's hands, dirty from carrying boxes. "This means more. People forgive faster when they see you doing good, not just defending yourself." The words hit home, making Gavin pause in his work. "I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness." "None of us do. That's what makes it grace." Ellis smiled and handed him another box to fill. By early afternoon, they'd finished the food bank work, but Janelle wasn't done. "I have an idea," she said as they walked back to the car. "Remember those potatoes we bought? What if we made dinner for the kids at the youth center?" "I don't cook," Gavin protested weakly. "You do today." The church kitchen was small but well equipped. Janelle tied on an apron and began directing operations like a gentle general. She showed Gavin how to wash and peel potatoes, correcting his technique with patience. "Smaller pieces," she instructed, demonstrating with her own knife. "They'll cook more evenly that way." Gavin concentrated on the task, aware of how foreign it felt. Him, a man who could buy any restaurant in the country, learning to slice potatoes from a woman who'd been sleeping in a shelter weeks ago. The kitchen filled with warmth and good smells as they worked. Janelle taught him how to season the meat, how to tell when the vegetables were done, how to make gravy from scratch. When he burned the first batch of rolls, she just smiled and helped him start over. Children began arriving at 5 o'clock, filling the church basement with chatter and energy. They stared at Gavin at first, this tall man in expensive clothes serving food alongside Miss Janelle. But children are less interested in scandal than in whether they can have seconds on dessert. "You're doing it wrong," a small girl informed him as he struggled to scoop ice cream. "You have to dip the scoop in hot water first." "Thank you," he said gravely, following her instructions. She beamed at him. As the evening wound down, Gavin found himself sitting at a table with Janelle, watching the last few kids finish their meals. The basement was warm with conversation and laughter. Through the windows, he could see snow still falling, but it didn't feel threatening anymore. "Look," Janelle said softly, nodding toward where Mrs. Wilson from the store was chatting with Reverend Ellis. They both smiled and waved. "They're seeing you," she explained. "Not the billionaire, not the scandal, just you!" Gavin felt something shift in his chest, like ice breaking up in spring. He looked at his hands, still smelling of potato peelings and dish soap, and realized they felt more useful than they had in years. The whispers in town hadn't stopped entirely. That would take time. But they'd changed tone, become more thoughtful. People had seen Janelle's genuine heart, her willingness to serve despite her own struggles, and they'd seen him, Gavin Rourke, learning to slice potatoes and scoop ice cream, trying and failing and trying again. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start. The mountain winter settled into a gentle rhythm as days melted into a week. Morning frost painted delicate patterns on the windows, while inside, warmth bloomed in unexpected ways. Gavin had hired 2 discreet security professionals who patrolled the perimeter, keeping the persistent paparazzi at bay. Their presence allowed a bubble of peace to form around the property, though Gavin knew it couldn't last forever. The church food pantry became their daily sanctuary. Janelle moved through the space like sunshine, breaking through clouds, organizing donations, and greeting volunteers with genuine warmth. Her joy was infectious, spreading to everyone she encountered. Even Gavin found himself smiling more often than not. "Come on," she called one morning, waving him toward the small chapel where several volunteers were gathering. "We always start with a song." Gavin shook his head, backing away. "I don't sing. Everyone sings," Janelle insisted, grabbing his hand. Her touch was warm, familiar now. "Even tone-deaf billionaires. Especially tone-deaf billionaires," added Mrs. Peterson, an elderly volunteer who'd taken to treating Gavin like one of her grandchildren. Finding himself surrounded, Gavin reluctantly accepted a worn hymnal. The pages were soft with age and use, notes faded but still legible. As the piano started, Janelle's clear voice rose above the others, pure and strong. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." Gavin mumbled along, his deep voice wavering uncertainly. Janelle caught his eye and grinned, nudging him playfully when he hit a particularly off-key note. To his surprise, no one winced or stared. They just kept singing, their voices blending in honest praise. Later that afternoon, they worked side by side, sorting donations. Janelle's hands moved steadily, checking expiration dates and organizing cans by type. The familiar routine had become almost meditative. "Can I tell you something?" she asked quietly, not looking up from her work. "Of course. I've been thinking about what comes next." She paused, rearranging some soup cans. "Before I got sick, I was a nurse's aide. I loved my work, especially with patients who needed extra care, extra kindness." Gavin nodded, remembering how naturally she tended to others, how she seemed to know exactly what people needed before they asked. "I've always dreamed of opening a small hospice," she continued, her voice soft but passionate. "Not just for end-of-life care, but for women recovering from illness, a place where no one feels ashamed for hurting." She looked down at her hands. "I know what it's like to feel broken, to think you're not worth helping anymore." The words hit Gavin like a physical blow. His sister Catherine had said almost the same thing during her final months, frustrated by how clinical and cold her treatment felt. She'd talked about creating a warmer place where healing meant more than just medicine. "I know it's probably silly," Janelle added quickly, misreading his silence. "I don't have the resources or—" "Come with me," Gavin interrupted, standing suddenly. "There's something I want to show you." They drove down to the lake in comfortable silence. The path was overgrown, but Gavin knew it by heart. Around a bend, partially hidden by snow-laden branches, stood Catherine's garden. "My sister created this," he explained, leading Janelle through the gate. "She loved growing things, even when she was too weak to do much else." The winter landscape couldn't hide the garden's bones, curved pathways, stone benches, raised beds now sleeping under snow. Though untended for years, there was still beauty in its wildness. "It's wonderful," Janelle breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. Catherine wanted to make it a healing garden, part of something bigger. Gavin's voice was rough with emotion. "She had the same dream you do, creating a place where people could heal in peace, with dignity." He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 flower bulbs he'd bought that morning, holding them out to Janelle. "Maybe we can start here." Her eyes filled with tears as she understood what he was offering. Together they knelt in the cold earth. The ground was partially frozen, but they worked together, using their hands to dig through the frost until they reached softer soil beneath. "Daffodils," Janelle said, cradling one of the bulbs. "They're always the first to bloom in spring." Catherine would have liked that. Gavin watched as Janelle carefully placed the bulb, showing him how to position it correctly. They worked in companionable silence, tucking the bulbs into the earth like precious secrets. When they finished, Janelle sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands. "Thank you," she said simply, but her eyes said much more. Gavin looked at their handiwork. 2 small mounds of dark earth amid the snow, unremarkable to anyone else but holding such promise. Like the bulbs they'd just planted, something new was beginning to take root between them, fragile but full of possibility. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the garden as they stood to leave. A light snow began to fall, each flake catching the golden light like tiny stars. Behind them, under the frozen ground, 2 daffodil bulbs waited for spring, their presence a quiet testament to hope and new beginnings. Janelle slipped her arm through Gavin's as they walked back to the car, both of them lost in thought but comfortable in their shared silence. The security team nodded respectfully as they passed, maintaining their protective perimeter, but even their serious presence couldn't diminish the peace of the moment. They had planted more than just flowers that afternoon. They had planted the seeds of a dream, one that would require patience, care, and faith to grow. But looking at Janelle's quiet smile, Gavin felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that some dreams were worth waiting for. The following week brought a gentler touch to the mountain air. The heavy snow began to melt, dripping steadily from pine branches and creating tiny rivulets down the rocky paths. Nature seemed to mirror the gradual thawing happening within the walls of Gavin's estate. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Janelle appeared at the main house's door, hugging herself against the chill. "The heating system in the guest house is making strange noises," she said apologetically. "And it's getting pretty cold in there." Gavin immediately ushered her inside. "You should have said something sooner. There are 5 empty bedrooms up here. Pick whichever one you like." That night marked the beginning of a new routine. Instead of retiring to separate buildings, they found themselves drawn to the massive stone fireplace in the main living room. Gavin would build a fire while Janelle made them hot chocolate. "Proper hot chocolate," she insisted. "Not that powdered stuff." They sat in the oversized leather chairs, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Their conversations meandered like mountain streams, touching on memories both sweet and bitter. "I used to climb trees all the time as a kid," Janelle shared one evening, curled up with her feet tucked beneath her. "Drove my mama crazy. She'd look up and there I'd be, waving from the highest branches of our backyard maple." Gavin smiled, watching the firelight play across her face. "I was more of an indoor kid, always taking things apart to see how they worked. Lost more than a few allowances replacing things I couldn't put back together." Their laughter mingled with the popping of the firewood. As the nights went on, their stories grew deeper, more personal. "I remember the day I found out I couldn't have children," Janelle said softly one evening, staring into her mug. "It felt like everything I'd dreamed about just disappeared. But you know what's funny? That same day I saw this little girl in the hospital where I worked. She was scared about getting her shot, so I sat with her, told her stories until she was brave enough. Sometimes I think God closes one door but opens another, shows us different ways to give love." Gavin was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "When Catherine died, I couldn't handle it. I threw myself into work, made billions, but I was dead inside. Started seeing everything as numbers on a spreadsheet instead of people with lives and families." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not proud of who I became." "But that's not who you are now," Janelle pointed out gently. Their evenings were filled with such moments of vulnerability, punctuated by lighter times when Janelle would tease him about his serious expression, or Gavin would attempt to tell jokes that were so terrible they became funny. When Sunday arrived, Janelle was surprised to find Gavin dressed in a suit at breakfast. "I thought maybe." He cleared his throat, looking somewhat uncertain. "I could join you for service today?" The small church was packed when they arrived, and a noticeable hush fell over the congregation as Gavin walked in. He felt dozens of eyes on him as he took a seat beside Janelle in one of the back pews. Reverend Ellis stood at the pulpit, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile as he began his sermon. "Today we're going to talk about transformation," he announced, his rich voice filling the space. "About how even the longest winter eventually gives way to spring, and how the hardest heart can thaw under the warmth of grace." Gavin felt the words sink deep into his consciousness, aware that many in the congregation were stealing glances at him. But instead of the judgment he expected, he saw curiosity and, increasingly, acceptance. The sermon wove together scripture and everyday wisdom, speaking of how change often comes gradually, like the melting of snow, first a drop, then a trickle, then a flood of renewal. "Sometimes," Reverend Ellis said, looking directly at Gavin, "God sends us exactly what we need, even if it arrives in unexpected packages." After the service, something remarkable happened. Instead of hurrying past him, people began approaching Gavin. Old Mr. Peterson, who ran the hardware store, shook his hand and thanked him for the recent donation to the food pantry. Mrs. Mitchell, who taught at the local school, told him how much it meant to see him helping with the children's supper program. One by one, the townspeople welcomed him, not as the billionaire in the mansion on the hill, but as a member of their community. Janelle watched it all with quiet joy, occasionally squeezing his arm in support. That evening, they sat in their usual spots by the fire, but something had shifted. The air between them felt charged with unspoken possibilities, like the moment before a summer storm. "I can't remember the last time I laughed this much," Janelle admitted, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "These past weeks, they've been like a gift I never expected." Gavin looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the strength and grace that had drawn him from the first moment. "I haven't lived this much in decades," he confessed. "It's like I was sleeping, and somehow you woke me up." The silence that followed was full of tender possibility. Neither rushed to fill it with words, content to let the moment stretch between them like a golden thread. The fire crackled softly, casting its warm glow over them both as they sat, simply being present in each other's company, aware that something profound and beautiful was growing between them. The evening wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, and they remained there, sharing occasional glances and soft smiles, while outside, the last of winter's snow continued its gradual retreat, making way for the promise of spring. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke as Aspen Ridge prepared for its annual Thanksgiving festival. Main Street had been transformed into a wonderland of twinkling lights and fall decorations, with garlands of autumn leaves draped between lamp posts and pumpkins lining the sidewalks. Janelle stood in front of the mirror in Gavin's guest room, adjusting her burgundy sweater dress. 2 weeks had passed since that evening by the fire, and each day had brought them closer. She smiled, remembering how naturally their friendship had deepened, like a river finding its course. "Ready?" Gavin's voice called from downstairs. "Coming!" She grabbed her shawl and descended the stairs to find him waiting in a charcoal suit, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "You look beautiful," he said softly, helping her with her coat. The drive into town was filled with comfortable silence and shared glances. Gavin had been unusually busy the past week, disappearing into his office for mysterious phone calls, but tonight his attention was fully present. Main Street was bustling when they arrived. Tables laden with traditional Thanksgiving dishes stretched the length of the closed-off road. Children darted between adults, their laughter mixing with the sound of live music from the local band. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, creating a ceiling of stars. "This is amazing," Janelle breathed, taking in the scene. "I've never seen anything like it." Mayor Beatrice Lang approached them, her face beaming. "Janelle! Gavin! So glad you could make it." She hugged Janelle warmly and shook Gavin's hand. "Everything's perfect this year, the best festival we've ever had, thanks to our mysterious benefactor." Gavin shifted uncomfortably, but Janelle noticed the pleased look in his eyes. He'd been different lately, more engaged with the community, more alive. She'd watched him transform from the isolated man she'd first met to someone who genuinely cared about the town's well-being. The evening progressed like a dream. They filled their plates with turkey, stuffing, and all the trimmings, finding seats at one of the long communal tables. Reverend Ellis said grace, his words floating over the gathered crowd about gratitude and community. Janelle noticed how naturally Gavin now fit in among the townspeople, exchanging pleasantries with the hardware store owner and discussing the weather with Mrs. Mitchell from the school. As dessert was being served, dozens of homemade pies contributed by local families, Mayor Lang took to the small stage. "Before we begin the dancing portion of our evening, I'd like to say a few words." She smiled broadly at the crowd. "This year's festival is special. We've been blessed with an anonymous donation that made all of this possible. The decorations, the music, the turkey for every family in need." Janelle felt Gavin tense beside her. "But I believe in giving credit where credit's due," the mayor continued. "Our generous benefactor is none other than Gavin Rourke." A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by enthusiastic applause. Gavin's face reddened as people turned to look at him, but their expressions held genuine appreciation, not the judgment he'd grown accustomed to in his corporate life. Janelle squeezed his hand under the table, pride swelling in her chest. "You're amazing," she whispered. The mayor wasn't finished. "Gavin has also established a fund for our community center's winter program, ensuring no child goes without warm clothes or hot meals this season." The applause grew louder. An elderly woman nearby wiped tears from her eyes, and several people stood up, clapping harder. Gavin finally stood, giving a modest wave that only made the crowd cheer more. When the music started again, this time slower and sweeter, Gavin turned to Janelle. "Would you dance with me?" Under the twinkling lights, they swayed together. The air was cool, but Janelle felt warm in Gavin's arms. Other couples joined them on the makeshift dance floor, but they barely noticed, lost in their own world. "I never thought I'd find this," Janelle said softly, looking up at him. "For so long I was just surviving, through the divorce, the illness, everything. I was so afraid." Gavin's arms tightened around her. "And now?" "Now," she smiled. "I'm finally free of that fear. I've realized healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about redeeming it, using it to understand others better, to love more deeply." They turned slowly under the lights, their movements perfectly synchronized. Gavin's eyes were filled with emotion as he looked at her. "I feel like God's watching over us," he said quietly. "Like everything that happened, all the wrong turns, all the hurt, was leading us here." The music softened, and they drew closer. Janelle could feel his heartbeat against her chest, steady and strong. When their lips met, it was gentle, reverent. Not a passionate explosion, but a quiet coming home. The kiss held all the tenderness of new love and all the depth of souls who had weathered storms to find each other. When they finally broke apart, the world seemed to shimmer around them. The festival continued, people laughing, eating, dancing. But for them, everything had changed. The drive home was peaceful, their hands intertwined on the console between them. Stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright in the clear mountain air. Neither felt the need to speak much. The connection between them said everything necessary. Gavin occasionally lifted their joined hands to kiss her knuckles, and Janelle would squeeze his fingers in response. The road wound through the darkness, but they weren't afraid. They had found something rare and precious, not just love, but understanding, healing, and hope. As they drove, both felt a deep sense of peace, believing the worst was behind them. The mansion's lights appeared in the distance, welcoming them home. Their hearts were full of gratitude for each other, for this night, for the beautiful way life could surprise you when you least expected it. The car pulled up to the house, but they sat for a moment longer, reluctant to break the magic of the evening. Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance, bearing witness to this newest chapter in their story. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the darkness about to descend. Gavin stood in his study, his coffee growing cold as he listened to the voicemail that had just shattered his world. "Hey, rich man." The voice was rough, menacing. "Saw you've been keeping my Janelle nice and cozy. Thing is, she belongs with me, always has. Tell her Marcus sends his love, and that we'll be catching up real soon. Gavin's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. He'd heard about Marcus Hale from bits and pieces of Janelle's story. The manipulation, the emotional abuse, the way he'd tried controlling her, even through her illness. "Everything okay?" Janelle appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of his oversized sweaters, her face concerned. Gavin deleted the message, forcing a smile. "Just some business matters. I need to meet with my lawyer in town. Shouldn't be more than an hour or two." She nodded, though something in his expression made her uneasy. "I thought I'd help Reverend Ellis organize the church library while you're gone." "Be careful," he said, more intensely than he meant to. When she looked startled, he added, "It's supposed to rain later." The drive into town was tense, Gavin's mind racing with possibilities. His lawyer, Sandra Chen, was already waiting at her office when he arrived. "We need a restraining order," Gavin said without preamble. "And I want to know every legal option we have for keeping Marcus Hale away from Janelle." Sandra listened as Gavin explained the situation, her expression growing grave. "I'll start the paperwork immediately. But Gavin, these things take time. If he's already making threats—" "I know." Gavin ran a hand through his hair. "I've hired additional security, but I can't watch her every second." "Maybe you should tell her about the threat," Sandra suggested gently. "She's finally feeling safe again. I don't want to destroy that." Meanwhile, at the church, Janelle hummed as she sorted through boxes of donated books. The quiet space felt peaceful, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. "Well, well, looking mighty comfortable in your new life." Janelle froze, the book in her hands tumbling to the floor. That voice, the voice that had haunted her nightmares. Marcus stood in the doorway, his familiar smirk twisting his handsome features. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, muscular from construction work, with those dark eyes that could switch from charm to cruelty in an instant. "What are you doing here?" Her voice shook despite her effort to stay calm. "Can't a man check on his girl?" He stepped closer. "Saw you in the papers with your fancy new boyfriend, playing house in his mansion while I'm drowning in debt. I'm not your girl anymore, Marcus." Janelle backed away, her heart pounding. "Please leave." His face darkened. "You think you're better than me now? Think you can just run off with some billionaire? It's not like that." "No?" He moved faster than she expected, grabbing her arm. "Then what's it like? You using him like you used me? Let go." She twisted away, but his grip tightened. "Not until you give me what I deserve." His voice dropped to a growl. "That rich boy's got plenty to spare. 20,000 should do it." "I'm not giving you anything." Janelle found her courage, remembering all the therapy sessions, all the healing she'd done. "You don't control me anymore." Marcus's face contorted with rage. He shoved her against the shelf, books clattering to the floor. "You ungrateful little—" The sound of a car door slamming outside made him pause. Janelle used the moment to break free, running towards the door. But Marcus was faster, catching her hair and yanking her back. The next few moments happened in a blur. Gavin appeared in the doorway, his face transforming from shock to fury. Marcus reached for something in his back pocket, a wrench gleaming dully in the colored light. "Let her go." Gavin's voice was deadly quiet. "Or what?" Marcus sneered. "You'll buy me off?" Janelle screamed as Marcus swung the wrench. Gavin managed to push her out of the way, but the metal connected with his ribs with a sickening crack. He stumbled, gasping. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called them. Marcus cursed, shoving past them toward the exit, but 2 officers were already there. They tackled him to the ground as he tried to run, the wrench clattering across the floor. "Gavin!" Janelle caught him as he slid down the wall, his face ashen. "Someone call an ambulance?" Blood was seeping through his shirt. The wrench's edge had torn through fabric and skin, but what scared her more was his labored breathing, the way he couldn't seem to get enough air. "Stay with me," she pleaded, cradling his head in her lap. "Please, stay with me." The paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficient movements a blur around her. They loaded Gavin onto a stretcher, rattling off medical terms that made her heart squeeze. Possible internal bleeding, pneumothorax, decreased breath sounds. In the ambulance, Janelle held his hand as the paramedics worked. Tears streamed down her face as she watched his oxygen levels fluctuate on the monitor. "You can't die on me," she whispered, pressing his hand to her cheek. "Not after I finally found light. Not after you showed me what real love feels like." The heart monitor beeped steadily, but Gavin's eyes remained closed. Outside, the world rushed by in a parade of lights and shadows, carrying them toward an uncertain future. "Please," she prayed, her voice barely audible above the ambulance's siren. "Please don't take him from me. Not now. Not like this." The hospital loomed ahead, its emergency bay a beacon in the gathering dusk. As they rushed him inside, Janelle felt her heart being wheeled away with him, into the sterile brightness of the trauma center, where all she could do was wait and hope and pray. The steady beeping of hospital monitors filled the sterile room as Janelle kept her vigil. 3 days had passed since Marcus's attack, and still, Gavin hadn't opened his eyes. The doctors said he was stable. 2 broken ribs, internal bleeding that they'd managed to control, and a severe concussion. But stable didn't mean awake, and awake was all Janelle wanted. She hadn't left his side except when the nurses insisted she shower or eat. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. But worse than the physical fatigue was the crushing weight of guilt that pressed against her chest. "This is my fault," she whispered, holding his limp hand. "All of it. The tabloids, the scandal, and now this." Her voice cracked. "I brought chaos into your peaceful life." The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting strips of light across Gavin's pale face. The bruising along his jaw had turned purple-yellow, a stark contrast to the white hospital sheets. His usually perfect hair lay messy against the pillow, and stubble darkened his cheeks. Reverend Ellis had visited yesterday, bringing coffee and attempting comfort. "God works in mysterious ways," he'd said. "Sometimes what looks like chaos is actually divine order." But Janelle couldn't shake the image of Marcus swinging that wrench, of Gavin crumpling to the ground. The what-ifs tormented her. What if Marcus came back? What if the next time Gavin didn't survive? What if her presence in his life continued to attract danger and scandal? A nurse entered, checking vitals and adjusting medications. "His numbers are looking better today," she said kindly. "Keep talking to him. Patients can often hear even when they're unconscious." When they were alone again, Janelle squeezed Gavin's hand. "Remember that first night by the fire? You didn't know me, but you took me in. You've been saving me ever since." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But I can't let you keep paying the price for my broken past." As if in response to her words, Gavin's fingers twitched, his eyelids fluttered, and slowly, so slowly, they opened. His gaze was unfocused at first, then found her face. "Jan-Elle." His voice was hoarse from disuse. "I'm here." She pressed his hand to her cheek, joy and guilt warring in her heart. "How do you feel?" He tried to shift and winced. "Like I got hit by a truck, or a wrench." Despite the pain, his lips curved in a weak smile. "You're okay." Typical Gavin, worried about her when he was the one in a hospital bed. "I'm fine. You're the one who played hero." "Not much of a hero." He coughed slightly. "Did they catch him?" "Yes. Marcus is in custody. They're charging him with attempted murder." Gavin's eyes closed briefly, then opened again. Good. He can't hurt you anymore. But he had hurt Gavin, and that was the problem. Janelle's resolve strengthened as she watched him struggle just to stay awake. She couldn't risk this happening again. The next few hours were a blur of doctors, tests, and careful optimism. Gavin was indeed stable, though he'd need weeks of recovery. He drifted in and out of sleep, each time checking that Janelle was still there. Late that night, when he was sleeping deeply, Janelle pulled out a notepad from her purse. Her hands shook as she wrote, "Dearest Gavin, you healed my heart when I thought it was beyond repair. You showed me what real love looks like, patient, kind, protective without possessing. But I can't destroy your world. My past is a storm that keeps finding me, and you deserve peace, not chaos. Thank you for the warmth of your fire, the safety of your home, and most of all for showing me I'm worthy of love. Maybe in another life, our timing would have been right. Please don't look for me. Know that wherever I am, I'll be praying for you. With all my heart, Janelle." She folded the letter carefully, placing it on his bedside table. Then she leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Goodbye," she whispered, memorizing his face one last time. The hospital corridors were quiet as she slipped away, her footsteps echoing on the linoleum floors. Outside, the night air bit at her tear-stained cheeks. She'd called a taxi earlier, and it waited now to take her to the bus station. As the car pulled away, she didn't look back. She couldn't. One glimpse of the hospital might break her resolve, and she had to be strong. For him. The next morning, Gavin woke to an empty room. His hand reached automatically for Janelle, finding only air. "Janelle?" His voice was stronger now, but no one answered. Then he saw the letter. His hands trembled as he read it once, twice, 3 times. Each word felt like another blow to his healing ribs, but this pain went deeper. "Nurse," he called, trying to sit up despite the protest of his injuries. "I need to leave." "Mr. Rourke, you're not cleared for discharge. Then get someone who can clear me." 2 hours and several signed waivers later, Gavin's driver helped him into the back of the car. Snow had started falling again, thick flakes that blanketed the world in white silence. The mansion loomed before him, grand and empty. Every step inside felt wrong without Janelle's presence. The kitchen still held the coffee mug she'd used 3 days ago. Her shoes still sat by the door. The blanket she loved was still draped over the couch. But the warmth was gone. Gavin made his way to the fireplace, their fireplace, where they'd spent so many evenings talking, laughing, healing. Now it was cold, the ashes swept away by the cleaning service. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees on the hearth. The pain in his ribs was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. "God," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I haven't talked to you in years, not since Sarah died." He swallowed hard. "But I'm talking now. Please, please don't let this be the end. I don't care about the money, the company, any of it. I need her. She makes everything make sense." Snow continued to fall outside the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled. But inside, there was only silence and the sound of a broken man's prayers. The morning headlines hit differently that week. Tech billionaire's love story reveals hidden heart, splashed across the front page of the Mountain Times. Gavin sat in his study, coffee growing cold as he read through article after article. The tone had shifted. No more accusations, no more scandal. Instead, reporters were telling a different story. Local church food bank thrives under mystery donor, one headline proclaimed. Another featured Janelle's work with the elderly at the church, complete with photos of her gentle smile as she helped sort donations. The paparazzi who'd once stalked them for dirt now seemed intent on uncovering acts of kindness. Reverend Ellis had given an interview that changed everything. "What I've witnessed," he told the Denver Post, "is nothing short of a parable of grace. Two broken people finding healing through service to others. Isn't that what we all need?" The article detailed how Gavin had quietly funded repairs for the church roof, how Janelle had spent hours counseling women at the shelter. Their story, Reverend Ellis concluded, reminds us that redemption isn't about wealth or status. It's about the heart's capacity to love. Gavin folded the newspaper carefully, his hands steady despite the ache in his chest. He picked up his phone and dialed his lawyer. "Begin the process," he said quietly. "I want to liquidate everything." "Mr. Rourke, are you certain? The company's value—" "I don't care about the value." His voice was firm. "Sell my shares, all of them, and contact the best private investigators you know. Money is no object." In his office, Gavin created a spreadsheet of his assets. The numbers were staggering. Billions in company shares, real estate holdings, investment portfolios. He began methodically marking each for sale, his mouse clicking through the empire he'd spent decades building. The private investigators called daily with updates. They'd traced Janelle's bus ticket to Denver, but the trail went cold there. Still, Gavin refused to give up. He increased their budget, expanded their search radius. "Sir," one investigator said gently, "she might not want to be found." "Then I'll respect that," Gavin replied. "But first I need to tell her one thing, just one thing." Between calls and meetings, Gavin spent hours in Sarah's garden. The space that had been overgrown when he'd shown it to Janelle was transforming. He planted everything his sister had loved: purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, wild roses. His hands, more used to signing contracts than working soil, grew calloused from digging. The townspeople watched his transformation with curiosity. The man who'd once hidden in his mansion now attended church every Sunday, sitting in the back pew where he and Janelle had sat together. After services, he lingered to help stack chairs or sweep floors. "You don't have to do this," Reverend Ellis said one afternoon, finding Gavin weeding the church flower beds. No." Gavin sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But I want to. She taught me that service isn't about obligation. It's about love." The Reverend nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The garden looks beautiful," he said, gesturing towards the estate visible on the mountainside. "Sarah would be proud." "It's not finished yet," Gavin replied, standing slowly. His ribs still ached sometimes, a reminder of that terrible day. "But it will be. Everything will be ready when Janelle comes home." "When?" Reverend Ellis asked gently. "Or if?" Gavin looked at the older man, his face weathered but peaceful. "When?" he said firmly. "I have to believe that. Faith, right? Isn't that what you've been teaching me?" The Reverend smiled, placing a hand on Gavin's shoulder. "You're learning well, my friend." That evening, as sunset painted the mountains gold, Gavin stood in Sarah's garden. The flowers swayed in the breeze, their faces turned toward the fading light. He touched a rose petal gently, remembering how Janelle's eyes had lit up when she'd first seen this space. "I understand now, Sarah," he whispered to his sister's memory. "Why you always said a garden needs patience. Some things can't be rushed. They need time to grow." He pulled his phone from his pocket, checking for updates from the investigators. Nothing yet, but he wasn't discouraged. Every flower in this garden had started as a tiny seed, buried in darkness. With time, with care, with faith, they'd found their way to the light. Gavin looked out over his changing world, the mansion he was preparing to leave, the empire he was willing to walk away from, the garden blooming with new life. Somewhere out there, Janelle was finding her own path. But he believed, with a certainty that surprised him, that their paths would cross again. Until then, he would keep planting seeds of hope. December arrived with a vengeance, wrapping the Colorado mountains in sheets of ice and relentless snow. Gavin sat in his study, staring at an email that made his hands shake. "We've located Ms. Brooks," the message read. "She's working at Mountain View Hospice in Glenwood Springs, approximately 40 miles from your location. The facility is scheduled to close at month's end due to financial difficulties." His throat tightened. After weeks of searching, she was so close, just 2 towns over. He grabbed his coat and car keys, barely registering the slate-grey sky, heavy with impending sleet. The Range Rover's wipers fought against the freezing mix as Gavin navigated the winding mountain roads. Visibility dropped to mere feet ahead, but he pressed on, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The 2-hour drive stretched into 3 as he carefully maneuvered through the treacherous conditions. Mountain View Hospice emerged from the fog like a humble sanctuary, a converted Victorian house with weather-worn blue paint and white trim. Gavin parked, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the front window, warm light spilled onto the porch, a beacon in the growing storm. Inside, the air smelled of pine cleaner and fresh coffee. A volunteer at the front desk looked up, recognition flickering across her face. Before she could speak, Gavin heard it. That familiar voice, soft and melodic, floating down the hallway. He followed the sound to room 12, where the door stood partially open. There sat Janelle, perched on the edge of a bed, reading from a well-worn book to an elderly woman. Her patient dozed peacefully while Janelle's voice brought the story to life, just as she'd done so many evenings by his fireplace. "And the secret garden bloomed and bloomed," she read, "and every morning revealed new miracles." Gavin's footstep creaked on the old floorboard. Janelle looked up, the book falling silent in her lap. Her eyes widened, and for a moment neither of them breathed. "Gavin," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He stepped into the room, careful not to disturb the sleeping patient. Janelle gently tucked the blanket around the elderly woman's shoulders and motioned for them to step into the hallway. In the fluorescent light, he could see the shadows under her eyes, the way her scrubs hung a little loose on her frame. But her face, her beautiful face, still held that same inner light that had first pierced his darkness. "How did you find me?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "I never stopped looking." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a folder. "But that's not why I'm here. I need to show you something." Her hands trembled as she opened the documents. Inside were legal papers, bank statements, and a mission statement emblazoned with the Brooks Rourke Foundation at the top. "What is this?" she breathed. "I sold everything," he said simply. "The company, the investments, most of the properties. It's all being converted into an endowment fund for places like this, for women recovering from illness and abuse, for the dreams you shared with me that night in the garden." Tears spilled down Janelle's cheeks. "But why my name? I don't deserve—" "Because you gave me back my soul." His voice cracked with emotion. "When I was nothing but a shell, you showed me what real strength looks like, what real faith looks like." He gestured to the hospice around them. "This place doesn't have to close. None of them do. The foundation will fund facilities across the state, starting right here." Janelle pressed a hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A passing nurse paused, concerned, but Gavin shook his head gently. "You can't just give away your whole empire," she protested weakly. "I already have." He smiled, the same soft smile she'd gradually coaxed from him during those precious weeks together. Turns out letting go of everything I thought I needed helped me find everything I actually wanted. The hallway fell quiet except for the distant beeping of medical equipment and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes. Outside, sleet tapped against the windows, but in here, in this moment, time seemed to stand still. The transformation of Mountain View Hospice began the very next morning. Gavin arrived at dawn with a truck full of supplies and a small crew of local contractors. The Victorian building's grounds, long neglected due to budget constraints, slowly came back to life under their careful attention. Janelle watched from the window as Gavin, sleeves rolled up despite the cold, helped install new benches along freshly laid stone paths. His movements were still careful, his ribs not fully healed, but his face glowed with purpose. When he caught her watching, he'd smile that gentle smile that made her heart skip. Over the next 2 weeks, the grounds evolved into something magical. They added raised flower beds for future spring plantings, strings of weatherproof lights that twinkled like earthbound stars, and a beautiful wooden gazebo painted the same soft blue as the main house. What had been an empty yard became a sanctuary where patients could find peace. "We're hosting a benefit dinner next week," Gavin announced one evening as they walked the new paths together. "Both towns, all the locals who've supported us. It's time to show them what their faith in us has created." The night of the benefit arrived with perfect winter weather, just enough snow to make everything sparkle, but not enough to keep people away. The hospice glowed with warmth and welcome. Volunteers had transformed the main gathering room into an elegant dining space, with white tablecloths and centerpieces of winter greenery. Guests began arriving at 6 o'clock, familiar faces from both Aspen Ridge and Pine Valley mingling together. Dr. Hensley chatted with local business owners who'd donated supplies for the renovation. The mayor, who'd revealed Gavin's anonymous donation at Thanksgiving, shook hands with Pine Valley's council members. Reverend Ellis arrived wearing his best suit, his weathered face beaming with pride. As everyone found their seats, he stood to deliver the blessing, his deep voice filling the room with warmth. "Lord," he began, "we gather tonight to celebrate renewal, not just of this building or these grounds, but of spirits and hearts. We've witnessed your grace through the hands and hearts of Gavin and Janelle, who remind us that broken things can be made beautiful again. Bless this place of healing, bless these servants of your love, and bless all who find shelter here. Amen." Janelle wiped tears from her eyes as the crowd echoed the Amen. She reached for Gavin's hand under the table, squeezing it tight. He squeezed back, but she noticed a hint of nervous energy in his posture. The reason became clear after dinner. Gavin stood, gently pulling her to her feet beside him. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her and the guests to the main entrance hall. There, covered by a cloth, hung something on the wall. With trembling hands, Gavin pulled the covering away to reveal a beautiful wooden plaque. Carved in elegant letters were the words, "Brooks Haven, where healing begins." Janelle's hands flew to her mouth. "You're renaming it." "This was always your dream," he said softly. "A place where no one feels ashamed for hurting. Every woman who comes through these doors will know they're not alone." The applause from their guests faded into background noise as Janelle traced the letters of her name with shaking fingers. All those nights of dreaming, all those prayers whispered into darkness. Here they were, made real in wood and love. Later, after the guests had gone and the cleanup was done, Gavin and Janelle walked out to the garden. Despite the late hour, the path lights created a gentle glow, and someone had lit the candles in the gazebo. The snow fell in lazy spirals, adding to the magic of the moment. They sat on one of the new benches, close enough that their breaths mingled in the cold air. The sound of laughter drifted from inside, where a few volunteers were finishing up. "Do you remember?" Gavin said softly. That first night at my gate? You were in so much pain, and you told me it hurts down there too. Janelle nodded, remembering the deep ache of loss and shame that had driven her into the mountains that night. I know now what you meant, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. That kind of pain goes deeper than any physical wound, but I've learned something beautiful since then. God heals everything, even hearts that seem beyond repair. He brushed a snowflake from her cheek, his touch as gentle as a prayer. Around them, the garden stood as testament to that truth. Beauty rising from barren ground, light pushing back darkness, love growing in the most unexpected places. The morning dawned with extraordinary clarity, painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Brooks Haven, casting warm patches across the polished floors. The gentle notes of classical piano music drifted through the hallways as hospice staff moved quietly, serving breakfast to their patients. In the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon rolls filled the air. Nurses chatted softly with residents while delivering trays, their gentle laughter mixing with the melody floating from the common room's speakers. Through the windows, frost sparkled on the garden paths like scattered diamonds. Gavin and Janelle stepped out into the crisp morning air, their breaths creating small clouds in the cold. Their fingers intertwined naturally as they walked the winding path through the garden they'd created together. The morning frost had touched everything. Each branch, every late-blooming flower, the wooden benches, coating the world in delicate white. The rising sun painted the mountains in shades of pink, the majestic peaks seeming to glow from within. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel possible, that made the struggles of the past seem distant and conquered. They paused near a cluster of winter-hardy roses, their heads still holding tight to the season's last blooms. Janelle reached out to touch one gently, a smile playing across her face. You know, she said softly, I used to feel so broken inside, like there were pieces of me that would never fit back together. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't feel that way anymore. Gavin's hand tightened around hers. My whole life was numbers and profit margins. He replied, his voice rough with emotion. I thought success meant watching my bank account grow. But now, he placed his free hand over his heart. Now it beats for something real, for helping others, for love. They walked on until they reached the edge of the lake, where the water stretched out before them like polished glass. The sunrise reflected perfectly on its surface, creating a mirror world of gold and rose. This was where their story had begun, where he'd found her that stormy night, where everything had changed. Gavin turned to face her, the morning light catching in his eyes. That night, he said softly, you came to me out of the storm. I've been thinking about that lately. Maybe that's how God saves men like me, through angels who bleed. Janelle smiled through the tears that spilled onto her cheeks, leaning into his solid warmth. Together they stood in comfortable silence, watching as the light spread across the mountains, painting everything in shades of hope and promise. The cold morning air wrapped around them, but neither felt its bite. They had found a warmth that went deeper than temperature, a healing that reached past their scars. Their eyes traced the majesty of the mountains as the sun continued its ascent. Two once wounded souls now made whole through faith, through love, through the gentle persistence of grace that had led them to each other. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.